Um, Hi, my name is Holly Brady. I am the founder and director of Purple Peace Foundation. We're located in the Kansas City, Missouri area, just a little bit east of Kansas City in Oak Grove, Missouri, which is a small town. Um, and it's a pleasure for me to be here to be able to speak with you today online. I apologize. I'm going to have to take the reading glasses on and off. I know they make a terrible glare when I have them on, but if you bear with me so I can read my notes and see what I'm doing. And I have a few slides. I will try sharing those. If that becomes more of a problem than a help, I will stop doing that. But thank you again for joining me today to talk about what is SUDEP. And it's not an easy conversation to have, but it's definitely a necessary conversation to have. When was the first time that you found out you can die from epilepsy? Let's see if I can share that. Was it when Florence Griffith Joyner, also known as FloJo, died in 1998? She was an Olympic athlete from the 80s and is still known as one of the fastest women on earth. Or maybe in 2009, when Jet Travolta died while he was on vacation with his family, John Travolta and Kelly Preston, and had a seizure and was and passed away while in the shower. Maybe more recently, last year, a lot of people came up to us and found out last year when Disney Channel's Cameron Boyce passed away in 2019 from SUDEP. And that was an eye-opener for a lot of people. We had a lot of people come to us and say that they couldn't believe you could die. They didn't know you could die from epilepsy. Approximately 50,000 people die every year from epilepsy-related causes. That includes traumatic injuries, drowning, accidents that happen from a seizure, and SUDEP. Let's see. SUDEP was first defined about 25 years ago. Wikipedia defines it as a fatal complication of epilepsy. It is the sudden and unexpected, non-traumatic and non-drowning death of a person with epilepsy, where there is no other medical cause of death evident during an autopsy. Excuse me. In 2011, my family and myself became all too familiar with SUDEP. See if I can screen share again. Okay. Amanda Claire Brady is my middle daughter. She's the one on the left with the brown hair and the big brown eyes. She was born November 14th, 1997 in Omaha, Nebraska. She came into this world a little earlier than we were expecting her to after a horrible snowstorm and power outage for several days. I went to the doctor that afternoon after school and she said, "You need to be here tonight. You're having this baby this evening." And that's exactly what happened. But Amanda also left this world much earlier than we could have ever imagined. Amanda was about 10 months old when she had her first seizure. Uh-oh. Lost my mouse. She was about 10 years old when 10 months old, I'm sorry, 10 months old when she had her first seizure. And there we go. It was in 1998. Like many parents, we had no idea what was going on or what had happened. She was asleep in her bed, in her baby crib still, and we heard something. We went in to check on her, and she was laying in her bed, kind of asleep, pretty listless, and just not herself. We could tell that she had gotten sick in her crib. So we got her up and started to change the sheets, and then we decided we needed to take her to the emergency room. When we got to the emergency room, she had a fever that had spiked, and she had no, even though earlier in the evening when we put her to bed, she'd had no symptoms or signs of being sick or not feeling well, or any signs of fever. But once we were at the emergency room, she did have a fever. So the doctors decided that the event had happened, was that she had likely had a seizure, but it was most likely a febrile seizure, and just give her some acetaminophen and keep watching her, make sure. But usually it appeared to be a febrile seizure due to her fever, and she would probably never have another one. They said it was very uncommon to have a second febrile seizure. But a couple weeks passed and we were back at the ER. This time they told us they again mentioned how rare it was to have a febrile seizure, but again, Amanda had a seizure, had a fever with her seizure. So they kind of thought that's probably what happened. They talked about putting her on seizure medications. She was about 10 and a half, 11 months old. And I just really didn't feel like I wanted to do that yet. So I was very reluctant, and we decided at that time not to put her on any seizure medications at that point. She was only a few months old. She wasn't, we had no idea why. There was no apparent reason or sign of what was causing her to have a seizure. And I didn't want to just put her on medication without doing any further, you know, investigating or having her seen or followed by someone other than just the emergency room, and then not know whether she still has a seizure problem or not. So we didn't put her on medication at that point. A few months later passed, and we were back at the emergent, or she had another one, and we saw that one happen, and we took her back to the emergency room, and they were pretty insistent that we needed to put her on medication, and said, most likely with it happening a third time, this wasn't a case of febrile seizures, and that, for her own safety, we needed to get her on medication. So we did agree to that. And then they scheduled us with a follow-up to see a pediatric neurologist. So we started that process and met with the neurologist in Omaha, Nebraska, where we were living, and saw her, continued on her medication. Eventually, as she got a little older, we did do an MRI, and never saw anything abnormal, never found anything that was causing her seizures. And then we, just continued with the medication, continued following up with this doctor, and just went on with life, learning how to live life with a child with epilepsy. We didn't fully understand what was going on or the diagnosis. We didn't know what was causing this. We learned what we should do, that we didn't have to go to the emergency room every time she had a seizure if she came out of the seizure and was doing okay. So we learned how to respond to that. Amanda learned to swallow a pill probably at 2.5 years old because she hated when we would crush it up and give it to her, even in ice cream or anything like that. So we went on and uh, taught her how to swallow a pill, and she did just fine. Uh, they told us things like, don't leave her alone in the bathtub. Okay, well, I'm pretty sure that you're not supposed to leave any child alone in the bathtub when they're a toddler or, young child. So that wasn't a problem. And then if she started to, if we started to see her lips changing color, turning blue, or her face getting very pale, or anything abnormal that way, call 911. So we learned to, how to proceed with life that way. And uh, they also told us about, if a seizure lasts longer than 5 minutes, that's when you need to go to the ER or call an ambulance. So we thought we were okay. No one really ever mentioned the risk of death. I think it was kind of implied, or I understood that it was possible because, of course, if I'm watching to make sure that she's breathing, then if she stops breathing, she could definitely, that could definitely have more serious implications. But no one really ever mentioned specifically that she could die. And, at that point, it was 1999 when we were dealing with this. Dr. Google wasn't around yet. And so we didn't really have the online resources that are available now to, you know, talk to other parents that way, or find other people that way, um, or research what medications, what the medication side effects can be. You just had to trust what the doctors were telling us, and that they were giving us the best advice, and we were doing the best we could for our daughter. She went through several periods in her life where she had seizure control. Um, she was teaching elementary school, and I remember I was teaching elementary school. Sorry, I was teaching elementary school, and I remember one year there was a teacher in the classroom across the hall that was in a special needs classroom, and she was telling me about a little girl in her class that had just started, and she was having 150 seizures every day. And I was just like, wow, I can't imagine that. And of course, to me, that translated that, well, she must have a lot worse kind of epilepsy than Amanda has, because Amanda doesn't have seizures even regularly. Sometimes we would go several weeks or several months without having a seizure. And sometimes the medication would control those. And then sometimes the medication, she would lapse, and uh, she would start having breakthrough seizures. And so we'd have to make some adjustments. But I just couldn't imagine someone having that many seizures in a day. And that's when I first started learning that there were different kinds of seizures, and that not all seizures looked the same, and that they could be, very different in different people. Um, there was another point when she was finishing kindergarten. She had gone almost a year without having a seizure, and the doctor decided that um, she should we should could try taking her off of her medication. He thought maybe she had outgrown them. She was 5, had just turned 6, I guess, while she was in kindergarten. And um, he thought, we were doing okay. We hadn't had one for a long time, and we decided to take her off the medication over the summer and try to see how she tolerated it, because I taught school and was home with her during the summer, and that would give us some time, and not while she was at school. We did great during the summer. We were so excited. that we had found, that maybe this meant she had outgrown her seizures and this wasn't going to be a lifelong problem. And then school started and still did great. And then about 3 or 4 weeks into school, she had another seizure and at school. And I will never forget her first grade teacher. Uh, I was a good friend with her, and she was on the opposite side of the school building as I was, but she scooped her up in her arms from their classroom and ran with her all the way down the hallway to the office. And someone else was on their way to come get me out of my classroom. And there we were with her having severe seizure again. So we got her to the hospital. They got her back on some medication, and I think we were on Depakote at that time. And she, continued with medication the rest of her life. Um, but there were times Amanda lived, a pretty normal, fun life as a kid, or what I thought was fun. Let's see if I can share here again. Let's see. Okay. So when she was young, she took up dance. She had fun with dance. When we moved to Georgia when she was going into kindergarten, and we started at a different dance studio. That dance studio took ballet a little more seriously than Amanda was ever ready to. And that teacher came out a few weeks into class and said, this might not be for her. So we've always kind of joked about Amanda loved to dance, but she got kicked out of ballet. But we found other things for her to do, and she was excited to participate in other styles and types of dance classes that were not quite so serious. She also took up tumbling and loved to tumble, and was learning to this was her on the balance beam with her teacher, and just loved being able to do that. It was a fun outlet for her. She took up competitive cheerleading, and that was her absolute favorite. She learned to do a back handspring, and she loved being out on the cheer floor and getting to compete. And that smile lit up the floor, and she was just in her moment there. This was taken when she was in, I think, third grade, and she really probably in third grade was at a peak of her um, abilities, as far as she was doing well in school. She was, very active and outgoing and just loving life at that age. Um, she loved to go fishing with my dad, and uh, always, she loved, we went camping a lot. So her dad, my husband and my dad would both spend time with her fishing. And that was one of her favorite activities. She played softball and had a great time. And when she was a little older, the last few years, a couple of years that she was alive, she was involved in bowling. And if you know anything, or if you start following our Purple Peace Foundation, we started our foundation out of having a bowling fundraiser after we lost Amanda, in her memory. And this year would have been our 10th event. We are sad we don't get to have it this year because of COVID, but we'll wait, and when we can do it right and have a fun time, we will have that 10th annual Bowling for Purple Peace event that was inspired by her love of bowling and being able to be with her friends and have a great time, doing that activity. So let's get back. So she was known and remembered for her beautiful smile, her big brown eyes that just took you in and made you want to give her a big hug. And she had a giggle that just was contagious. Just loved her giggle. Miss her very much. um, as she was older, she did experience learning disabilities, and she had uh, delays with her social skills. Um, didn't, like I said, as she was older, um, we lost Amanda when she was 13. Uh, when she was about 10, we went in the hospital and did a seizure study, and were considering doing surgery um, to help with reducing her seizures, but we found out she was not a candidate. Um, we had moved back to Missouri. My husband was in the military. And so in 2011, right at the beginning of 2011, we moved back to Missouri where both of our families were. He had retired, and he had found a job. So we relocated back to our home with our families, and Amanda was so excited. I told my mom 4 or 5 months before we were moving that just keep the porch light on, because at any moment Amanda's just going to walk out the door, and she's going to show up on your doorstep, because she could not wait to get to Missouri and get to be here with her grandparents and her cousins that lived here, and just really was excited to move to Missouri. Um, let's see. Amanda's last seizure was on September 20th of 2011. I play that day over in my head over and over. It will always be like it just happened yesterday. Um, we had had a stomach bug going through the family, and had started with my youngest daughter. She had gotten better and she was back in school. Um, my husband had had it over the weekend. My oldest never really fully had it, but wasn't feeling great and decided she needed a day off of school. And and Amanda kind of was back and forth with that too a little bit. Didn't feel good, but wasn't real sick. I was just getting over it. And it was a Tuesday. I was laying in the recliner in the living room, and um, the night before, that Monday evening, Amanda had gone to bed, and at about 11 o'clock, we could hear something and went to check on her, and she was having a seizure. And so about 11 o'clock that night, um, we went in, we watched her, we sat with her. The seizure ended. She woke up. She was talking to us and responding, and everything seemed okay. Was just one of her regular seizures like we'd seen her have many times. And with her being on the fringe of not feeling well, that was always a trigger for her. If she got sick at any point, uh, she would have a seizure. When she was a baby, she would have a seizure all those times that they kept thinking that they were febrile seizures. um, she would have a seizure, and then usually 24, 48 hours later, we'd find out she had an ear infection. So the seizure was always kind of an indicator that she was getting sick. So that Monday night, she had that seizure, but she came out of it. Everything was okay. She went to sleep. We checked on her several times during the night, just making sure she was okay. But we had already decided she wasn't going to go to school on Tuesday. So we were all of us home except for my youngest. And um, she came downstairs at about 8:30 that morning, had woke up and laid down on the sofa. I was, like I said, in the recliners in the same room with her. Like, she laid down on the sofa and just didn't feel herself, didn't feel great. And I told her, it's fine if you want to lay there and take a nap, you can just rest today. We're going to take it easy. And so she did, and she dozed off and fell asleep. And about 9:45, sometime between 9:45 and 10 o'clock that morning, she started having a seizure, laying there on the sofa asleep. And I got up and I hollered through the house for my husband, and he came in, and we could just tell something was different. It was just a little off. It didn't feel like her normal seizure. So we were trying to figure out, he had already moved her from the couch to the floor so that she wouldn't fall off of there. But we were trying to figure out if we could get her lifted up to get her in the car, and we would head to the hospital. Um, we realized pretty quickly that we weren't going to be able to move her ourselves. And so about that time, my oldest daughter was a senior in high school, and she was home with us. Um, she actually heard all the commotion, came to see what was going on, and she called 911. Um, that's when Mark noticed that Amanda was no longer breathing, and so he started doing CPR. He could not find her pulse. So he started CPR. I cannot tell you how fast the ambulance and the paramedics got here that day. Usually when something's happening, you think you just kind of freeze and time just seems to stand still. And I thought this was going to be forever before somebody got here. And those paramedics were in my house so fast that morning. I was so grateful. And they took over and did CPR. But again, they still were not getting a heartbeat. Um, they injected the atropine into her leg and administered that, and eventually did get uh, her pulse back and her heartbeat. She still wasn't breathing very well. So they got her to the hospital and they put her on a ventilator and, um, evaluated her. She was taken from that hospital to Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City. Um, so that was by Tuesday afternoon. We were finally at the hospital with her, meeting with doctors, trying to figure out what was going on. She had gone into status ellipticus, which was just where she was having a constant um, seizure. Her brain was just constantly seizing and wouldn't stop. Still on the ventilator, they had her sedated. Uh, so, we were really she couldn't communicate with us. Of course, I was talking to her, but um, I think her grandma promised her an alpaca if she would just wake up because she loved alpacas. Um, but as time went on, they were doing tests and realizing that, um, that point where she had gone 20 to 25 minutes without breathing and without a pulse. And her brain was now swelling and her organs were shutting down. And there was no chance of her making it through that. Um, so I've always felt like, I know SUDEP is sudden unexplained death, and she had a sudden unexplained seizure that caused her to, um, you know, not be breathing and not have a heart rate. But I always have said if I hadn't been in the same room with her, if that had happened that way the night before, if I hadn't been there right when she had that seizure, I don't think we would have even had the trip to the hospital. I think it would have just been one of the cases that I hear of so many times of a child that passed in her sleep. And it would have been SUDEP, you know, just because we prolonged it for a couple of days trying to save her, and weren't able to. So that was probably the first time not probably, that was the first time the doctors ever talked to me or my husband about SUDEP, um, which was pretty shocking at the time. Here we are going through it. Like I said, I always knew death was a possibility, but I didn't expect that. Um, so let's see where I'm at here. I'm getting off track of my notes and just talking. So I just don't want to leave anything out. Let's see. Um, so that was, just how it happened with us, with our experience. And that was the first time that the doctors really talked to us about what could be involved. And that's, let's see if I can, you know, she was, there we go. She was our beautiful girl and will always be remembered and loved that way. Um, it's estimated that there are 200,000 new cases of epilepsy every year, and 3.4 million Americans are living with epilepsy. It affects more people than, affects more people than multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, and Parkinson's combined. More people die from epilepsy than there are people that die from breast cancer. And while all of those conditions deserve and need awareness and research and funding and just they are all horrible conditions for anyone to have to live with. Epilepsy is just not talked about. People don't discuss it. People don't hear about it. People don't know what to do, and it scares them. There's still a lot of stigmas related to epilepsy, and people still want to hide the fact that they have it. So let's talk about in SUDEP, 50,000 Americans die each year from seizures and related causes, which include SUDEP. 1 in 1,000 people with epilepsy die each year from SUDEP. And that's not a huge number, I guess, in the world of statistics. But, when your child is that 1 in 1,000, it's your whole world. And when you factor in how many people are living with uncontrolled seizures despite their medications, and 1 in 150 people with uncontrolled seizures die from SUDEP each year, then you're talking about a lot higher, percentage of deaths. And it is very, it's a lot more common than it's considered rare that people die, but I know so many people that I could just sit here and name off, starting with other foundations that have been started for this same reason. Danny Stanton with the Danny Did Foundation, Chelsea Hutchison from the Chelsea Hutchison Foundation, to my daughter, Amanda. I have met other moms. I have a very good friend that is one of our families. Her daughter is 10 or 11 this year. And, they have been involved with us for the last 8 years. And she has epilepsy. Their daughter has epilepsy, and they've gotten a seizure response dog for her, and we just have done so much. But when I met her, the one thing she said is, I had another child and she died at 18 months old because of a seizure. And I was just devastated. I've met um, another family that has a daughter that went to college and passed away as soon as she, shortly after the beginning of her freshman year from a seizure at college. And it's just terrifying what can happen. Um, Unfortunately, SUDEP is likely underreported and it's often unrecognized. One of the things with SUDEP is that it is not recognized on a death certificate unless an autopsy has been performed and they can find no other cause of death. Common criteria that they use to determine SUDEP is that a person has epilepsy. A person has epilepsy, defined as recurrent unprovoked seizures. The person died unexpectedly within a reasonable state of health. Death occurred suddenly and during normal activities, which can include sleep. An obvious medical cause of death cannot be determined at an autopsy, like a heart attack or something of that nature. Death was not the direct cause of the status ellipticus. So, they look at these criteria, but again, only if they perform an autopsy does it get reported as SUDEP. The doctor sat down with my husband while we were in the hospital before they had taken her off of life support and told him this was likely a SUDEP situation and explained that to him. Again, that was the first time we'd ever heard anything of it. We did not have an autopsy done, so her death certificate does not say that, even though that's what the doctor told us was likely the cause. But we did request that he put on there that she died from a seizure because of her epilepsy. And, you don't think about all those things at the time, but it is important because that is how the statistics get started, is what they can take off of a death certificate. And that is, just so important in being able to get that recognized as a legitimate cause of death, and how important it is to educate people about that. There are many risks that come along with SUDEP. Risk factors that can help you determine how much of a risk you want to be, you might be, or your child might be. Those include having uncontrolled or poorly controlled seizures. If your medications, and we know that happens, 30 to 40% of people do not have control with epilepsy, do not have their seizures controlled. There are just people that we cannot find the right medication for them. Having epilepsy over a long period of time, so the longer that you've lived with epilepsy, puts you at higher risk. Treatment methods that involve multiple anticonvulsant drugs. So if you are taking more than one or two different drugs to help control, keep your seizures as controlled as possible, having multiple drugs of that is a necessary risk, but it still can put you more at risk. Those who have generalized tonic-clonic or grand mal seizures are at higher risk of SUDEP. Patients with developmental delays are at higher risk of SUDEP. People who experience seizures while they're sleeping, that's also, and a majority of cases I talk to people that have experienced SUDEP, it has happened while they were sleeping, while their loved one was sleeping. And then the last one that I have as a risk factor is if you don't take your medicine correctly or as prescribed, or you stop taking your medication, um, then you're definitely putting yourself at risk for SUDEP. Um, the young girl that I know that passed away at college, that was most likely the incident that happened. Um, in that case, young adult wants to experience life, on your own, your first taste of freedom when you go to college. I get that. But it is so important to continue taking that medication, not get into, bad habits or a lazy routine of forgetting to take it, or, um, just deciding I don't want to feel like my medicine makes me feel funny sometimes. I don't want those side effects anymore, and just quit taking it without talking to your doctor and without help, or finding different ways to manage your seizures. You are putting yourself at a huge risk of SUDEP. And I see I am getting close on time. So things you can do to uh, reduce your risk is, know what your triggers are, avoid uh, seizures, avoid things that are going to trigger your seizures, take precautions when you're participating in activities that could result in an accident. Things like swimming, don't go swimming alone. Make sure you have someone around. I'm not definitely not advocating that you never go swimming or do activities that are fun. You should live every moment you have to the fullest, and go for those experiences, but just take precautions. Have someone with you. Let that person know that you have seizures. Make sure that person knows how to respond when you have a seizure. Use seizure monitoring devices and alarms to help you with that, or seizure service dogs are great. Make sure people around you know seizure first aid and are trained. It was so thankful that my husband jumped in and knew CPR, so he could respond so quickly. If you have someone in your family, in your house, or that you are frequently with that has epilepsy, you should consider getting trained in CPR, knowing what to do. Take all your medications, have an action plan that's written out and posted somewhere that people know what to do. If I have a seizure, do this, call this person, make sure I'm not, where I'm going to get hurt, those things, and just be informed. Let that be your guide, being informed. Uh, Back to what I said at the beginning. When did you first hear that someone could die from epilepsy? When uh, when Amanda died, we heard that all the time. That was our question we got all the time. I didn't know you could die from epilepsy. I had people that didn't know me that read about our story in the newspaper or other places, and they said, I didn't know you could die. People that have epilepsy that were telling me, I didn't know this could happen. I don't want anyone to be in that situation where you're faced with learning this at the last moment when it's too late and they're already gone. That's why it's important that I share my story and I tell people about it. It's hard to talk about this. No one wants to talk about what might cause you to die. No one wants to sit around and talk about how they lost your child, how you lost your child. But I do it because you need to know. Every person with epilepsy should, oh, sorry, every person that has epilepsy should be warned about SUDEP. You know, has your doctor ever said anything to you? Was it when you first got diagnosed? Was it second or third visit? Is today the first time you've heard about it? I hope not. And if it is, talk to other people about it. Keep spreading the news and letting people know, because there are precautions you can take. It's not everyone's story that has epilepsy. I always say, this is our story. This is what happened to us, but this isn't what happens to everybody. And there are things you can do, you know, learn seizure first aid, learn how to respond, have that action plan, and, um, you know, keep living a full life as much as you can. Don't let that slow you down. Don't live in fear. Get informed. Um, live with hope, and know that there are, you know, there are a lot of people out there that are fighting for you, and we all want to make a difference and have things change. And we wish we didn't have to tell about SUDEP, but when you're informed, you have power. Thank you for being here with me today, and feel free to please check. Let me see if I can get that. I will list a lot of these things on our website, as far as the first aid and everything. One last thought I want to leave you with is, with it being Epilepsy Awareness Month, uh, never hesitate to spread awareness. You never know. And there is not a day that goes by that we tell somebody our story or talk to someone about epilepsy that they don't say, you know, oh, my neighbor has it, my cousin has seizures, you know, there's all these different things. And just because you think epilepsy doesn't affect you, we used to think that too, and it does. So again, thank you very much. I'm with Purple Peace Foundation, and we really love to work to spread awareness and help families that are living with epilepsy. We've been a part of EADDL now for 6 or 7 years. Missed being at Disneyland this year. Can't wait to be back out there next year. But please feel free to check out our website. And if you're visiting on the virtual event, we also have a booth there, and hope we can see you next year in California if you get to come visit. And you know, feel free to reach out and contact us at Purple Peace if you have any questions or need more information. Thank you.